Welcome back. This is part 4 of this lecture where I've just been going through various types of comparisons to help you see different ways that you can look at artwork in terms of formal analysis. And so this will be the last one I do for this week, or at least for tonight, and then maybe sometime later this week or on the upcoming weekend I will do another set of comparisons for you. So looking at these two works, we've looked at both of these a number of times, and one of the main things that I have talked about was how, for both of these, but especially for the Bellini, how it uses the kind of overall structure, the overall geometric structure of the page structure, right? The corner-to-corner diagonals, where center is, right? Where center is this way, and all of those structures, how it uses those, right, to organize the composition and to play off the composition and to actually become part of the meaning of the painting, right? That the focus that St. Francis is having, right, his sense of a connection with the divine that happens to line up as a straight line, right, from his chest, right, straight to the corner of the painting, right, so that the geometry of the painting becomes, in a way, symbolic of the divine itself. Okay, so that's one way to think about it. But let's start from the beginning. Let's look at these two paintings in terms of. Let's start with value contrast. How do we compare these two in terms of value contrast? And if we're looking at both of these, we'd have to struggle a little bit to say, well, which one has a wider range? Certainly, the Giotto has lighter values in general, like has many more areas of quite light value. The lightest lights on many of these forms are quite light, whereas the overall temperature and value of the painting is, this feels, of Bellini's painting, feels much more like a late evening, right? Or not, like a late afternoon, early evening, with the sun setting. There's this warm light, and everything seems cast just a little bit darker, with the exception of maybe like that cloud right there. There's no light that's truly like a pure, bright white. But then in terms of the dark values, there seems to be a lot more dark values in the Bellini, right? And there's a sense of a lot of the mid values shifting towards dark, quite clearly, whereas the darks in the Giotto are more, more spot, a few areas, and are more literally connected to the local value and the local color of objects. Okay, that the only things that are dark are where we feel like, well, that must be because that figure was wearing a very, very dark robe. So there's less of a sense of really strong light in this space compared to the Bellini. The light is more abstract in the Giotto. So, but that still means that we have a hard time saying one has a wider contrast than the other. I guess I would, if forced to make a decision, I would say that the Giotto has a wider range of contrast. From the lightest light to the darkest dark seems like a slightly wider range. But one of the things I would say is that the overall value is more dominated by mid-dark in the Bellini, and that there is more atmosphere, like both in terms of value, the way the value is organized, but also in terms of the color. That overall warm color to much of the painting has much more of a mood of a particular moment, time of day, and of atmosphere. Will be another thing that we could say. So let's talk about. So we already talked about the page organization. Whoops. Let's go back. The page organization of the Bellini. If we look at in the Giotto, it also is playing off of certain diagonals, like this diagonal, which is going from roughly about the 2/3 mark down to the 1/3 mark, and then this diagonal, which is the corner-to-corner diagonal. They intersect pretty much right at this spot here, which is the most important moment in the painting, right? That would be the moment as Mary is holding Jesus. And so that would that certainly would show, the Giotto is also very carefully composed and organized. What would be another kind of comparison between the two paintings? And I guess one of the things I would say is in terms of color and in terms of value and line, because of the nature of how Giotto worked, the line work, the color decisions, and the shapes, they're all a lot more overt and clearly there's kind of a design quality to each of these decisions. Whereas since the Bellini is much more an attempt at illusionistic space with atmosphere, it's less those decisions, the linear and shape and color decisions, are more hidden within the space of the painting, within the illusion of the painting. Okay, I think I'm going to be able to compare this one and then the next painting, and then that'll probably be it for this evening. So this is a much closer comparison to what we are doing for your, or what you're doing for your paper, right? In that we have a German expressionist of the 20th century paired with a Baroque artist. In this case, this is a Sebastiano Ricci. And so let's start with the value, right? The value range. And in this case, the value ranges between the two paintings are similar, but I'd have to say that the Kirchner here has a stronger value range, because the darks, where they are dark, they're extremely dark, straight out of the tube type darks, and then the lightest values are just as light or lighter than any of the values in the Ricci. On the other hand, the Ricci painting is much more dominated by mid values and mid darks. It's much more atmospheric, right? One of the clear differences between these two paintings is how they think about line and shape as well as color. That the Kirchner is much more upfront and what's the word I'm looking for? And straightforward about the fact that these are just shapes, right? And that this is just a line, and that all these shapes are pretty much just areas of color. Whereas there's line and shape and color all through the Ricci, but the painting is much more, in its effort to create atmosphere and mood and light and form, it's much more trying to hide that there is, those decisions of color and value. And let's see what else. In terms of composition, we have within the Ricci, we have kind of a slight nod to Renaissance triangular composition here, right? As well as some thought about, corner to corner diagonals, but it's primarily a triangular composition that is organized. Whoop, I keep doing that. Whereas in the Kirchner, we have this very, very strong organization of her lining up on the diagonal from corner to corner, and then this reflection of her in the mirror kind of leads to a slightly diagonal relationship going this way, which is not lined up on the corner to corner diagonal. Seems to imply sort of an off-center kind of action. And another way to think about these two paintings is the way your eye moves through them, right? We talked about, visual pathways last week, and how the difference in the way that artists thought about landscape paintings and thought about looking at a painting as a journey, and that your eye moves through a painting in a certain path. And you can definitely see that in this painting, that it's organized in such a way that it's got sort of like the major journey and then a secondary journey, right? We're going to look over here to Joseph, and then we're going to then explore this landscape space back there. Look, there's a building back there. And then maybe later on we'll be like, what's going on in these dark woods here, right? It's a much slower type path, whereas if we look at the Kirchner, it's much quicker. There's less areas for our slow down